Welcome to Episode 7 of the Rescued by Dragons podcast, the ongoing tale of a weekly Dungeons & Dragons campaign played by a group of friends in Portland, Maine. My name is Dominic White, and I invite you to picture yourself in a cozy, torchlit tavern, ale in hand, gathered around a table with other listeners, waiting to hear the next chapter in the tale of the Brunch Club. But first, a quick recap of our previous episode. In Episode 6, the Brunch Club was set upon by a basilisk, who immediately turned Vorjon to stone. Fortunately, the rest of them were able to kill the basilisk quickly. As they debated what to do with Vorjon, Salus's spells released a magical surge, an unpredictably occurring side effect of her magic powers. Anything can happen during a magic surge, and in a fortunate turn of events, Salus's very first occurrence of it restored Vorjon to his dragonborn self, curing him of the effects of the basilisk's gaze. They made camp as Drusilla harvested cranberries. While the rest of the party was sleeping, a lone bullywug entered their camp, and Drusilla killed it with a ladle full of hot cranberry sauce. The next morning, they reached the end of the boardwalk, and any kind of a walkable path. They spent the day trudging through the bog. They were attacked by a giant centipede that paralyzed Alora. Fortunately, the rest of the Brunch Club was able to kill them off. They spent the day trudging through the bog, but were attacked by giant centipedes that paralyzed Alora. Fortunately, the rest of the Brunch Club was able to kill them off. Vorjon healed Alora's paralyzation with a lesser restoration spell. They then began to make camp for the night. And now, Episode 7, Bogged Down. The Brunch Club made camp for the night, with Drusilla taking the first 4-hour watch and looking over her companions. Vorjon slept next to his armor. Salus slept in the shadow of a scale mail hauberk that seemed comically big compared to her. She was so powerful for such a small thing. If not for her and her wild magic, they'd have had to leave Vorjon behind, where he succumbed to the basilisk's gaze, serving as his own tombstone. Alora had also nearly died, paralyzed and nearly drowned, but saved by Vorjon. Drusilla couldn't keep the morbid thoughts from creeping into her head. Who would be next to come so close to death? Was it her turn? Was it Salus's? She sighed. She knew the Raven Queen would come for them all sooner or later. It didn't do one much good to dwell on when it might happen. She was eventually relieved of her watch by Alora, who took the remaining 4 hours. Being elves who only needed 4 hours of deep meditation at night in lieu of sleep, they had fallen into this routine of splitting the watch between the two of them while their companions slept through the night. The evening passed without incident, and after a quick breakfast, they waited for Vorjon as he put his armor on gingerly. Being turned to stone and then back to his scaled flesh again had done a number on his body. The Dragonborn's every joint ached and his eyelids threatened to close under the weight of exhaustion. Even so, he stoically joined his comrades to continue their soggy march westward toward the far edge of the unrelenting bog. Alora continued to guide them on their way with her compass and map. The bog was still too deep for Salus to walk through, but despite his exhaustion, Vorjon still agreed to carry her. Perched atop his shoulders, Salus kept an eye out for any creatures that might want to do them harm. On that day, they encountered nothing to impede their march and traveled a good distance for an exhausted party, trudging through tangled marsh grass and mucky water. As the sun began to set, Salus noticed a dry patch of land in the distance, where they decided to make camp for the evening. Once again, Drusilla took the first watch. At the end of an uneventful 4 hours, Alora relieved her. About an hour into her watch, Alora scanned the area around them. She thought she saw a shape some distance away. She peered into the darkness, trying to find it. With surprising speed, the large shape descended into their camp from above, before Alora had time to warn the others. It was a terrifying-looking creature. It looked like a lion, but with a face that was more human than cat. Its wings were large and leathery, like an overgrown bat's. The tip of its disproportionately long tail ended in a club of what looked like 24 razor-sharp spikes. As it landed, it went for the sleeping dragonborn, biting at him with his disturbing half-lion, half-human mouth. Vorjon was able to grab his shield in time to block the biting attack and fended off another claw attack, but he could not defend himself against the wide, swinging club of spikes that circled around his shield and raked painfully across his back. Alora quickly notched an arrow and shot it in the beast's shoulder. Vorjon groped next to him for his warhammer, found its handle, and swung it at his attacker as it recoiled from Alora's arrow strike. Vorjon flailed wildly, though, barely being able to see the beast in the darkness. Salas and Drusilla were woken up by the sudden commotion, but could do nothing before the beast attacked again. Vorjon was ready for the beast's tail attack and deflected it with his shield, but could not turn himself around fast enough to avoid a deep bite to his shoulder, and a claw attack raking across his chest. Even with his shield, he felt vulnerable without his heavy armor. Drusilla cast 3 orbs of light that illuminated the beast. Salas shot as many magic missiles as she could into it. Alora, seeing their foe in full light for the first time, identified it as a manticore as she sunk another arrow into its flesh. Now able to see his target, Vorjon swung his warhammer and spoke a prayer. When the hammer connected with a satisfying thud, a bolt of divine silver energy crackled down from the sky and smote the beast, but it still clung desperately to life. The manticore, sensing the odds were no longer with him, turned and flew off into the night, but could not get out of range in time to save itself from Alora's arrows and another barrage of Salas's magic missiles. Vorjon cast a couple healing prayers on himself. As he inspected his torn and bloodied shirt, he decided at his next opportunity he was going to buy himself a suit of studded leather armor to wear it at night while they were on the road. It would be soft enough to sleep in, but not leave him so defenseless while he slept. With dawn still a few hours away, and the group not fully rested, they went back to sleep while Alora finished the watch. Because of the manticore attack, the brunch club slept a little longer and left a little later than they normally would, but still managed to move at a decent pace. They were slowed down around midday when a writhing mass of snakes attacked them, but the snakes were a mere nuisance and put down swiftly. With the snakes dispatched, they continued on their way. As the afternoon progressed, they noticed the bog was getting shallower, and the dry patches of land were beginning to become more prevalent around them. Their spirits were boosted by this, as they hoped it meant they were finally reaching the other side of the Lich Bog. Salas, still perched on Vorjon's shoulders, spotted another small hillock in the middle of some dry land. They reached it and set up camp. After dinner, Vorjon began taking off his armor, when Drusilla said, "Wait, I hear something." They all got very quiet, listening for noises in the darkness. They could hear a shuffling in reeds, like something being dragged or a creature limping. They heard soft moans as well. The moans were devoid of expression. They weren't mournful or anguished. It sounded like someone didn't know how to breathe without making noise. Drusilla conjured her 3 orbs of light, which she sent circling around the small hill they camped on. As the lights danced around them, the gaunt, pale, gray-green faces of zombies emerged from the darkness. Vorjon and Drusilla quickly smiled at each other. Being a paladin and a cleric, killing undead was not only their specialty, it was their pleasure. Vorjon turned around to make sure nothing was sneaking up on them from behind, and saw another creature. This one was taller than the zombies. It did not shuffle or moan. It had no features at all, as its entire form was black. It didn't look like a creature wearing black armor, though. It looked like a creature of pure darkness. Vorjon knew it was a shadow fiend, and he was just as happy to kill it as he was killing zombies. Drusilla said a prayer. The raven emblem on her chest glowed. When she finished the prayer, a faint purple light emanated all around them. Every zombie suddenly began to flee, frightened by the divine energy of the Raven Queen channeled through Drusilla. Much to Vorjon's delight, the Shadow Fiend was unaffected. As his companions began picking off the zombies one by one as they fled, he and the Shadow charged each other. The Holy Paladin and the Shadow Fiend traded blows. Vorjon was able to deflect many of the Shadow's attacks with his shield. The holy smiting energy he channeled through his warhammer with every landing blow made his attacks more effective against his unholy foe and put the fight squarely in the Paladin's favor. In less than a minute, the Shadow had been struck down, dissipating into the night. All of the zombies lay in pierced and scorched heaps of harmless skin and bone. The brunch club finished making camp, and with Alora and Drusilla watching over them diligently, they slept through the night undisturbed. This story will continue next week in Episode 8. Episode 7 was written by Dominic White with help from Brian Mesmer. Drusilla was played by J.P. Black, Alora was played by Liz Richard, Salas was played by Anna Flemke, Vorjon was played by Dominic White, and our benevolent dungeon master was Brian Mesmer. More information about Rescued by Dragons and this podcast can be found at rescuedbydragons.com. You can follow us on Instagram at Rescued by Dragons and on Twitter at Rescue Dragons. Thank you very much for listening, and please join us next week to find out, along with the rest of us, what happens next.